Anybody do anything interesting at the bench this week or last week? What do you got, Carmen?
I did that stone setting. I don't have it with me.
Okay. That's
So,
good.
I posted it.
Good.
I got some tools. I got that round.
Oh yeah. Did anybody else buy the inexpensive graver ball? I'm gonna pull it up. Oh, what do you got? Another setting? Ooh, show this one. Hang on, let me pin you. Spotlight for everyone. And you gotta unmute yourself.
I didn't have a way to cut them, but I set these this way vertically. Can
Nice.
you see?
Very nice.
Thank you.
Is it amethyst?
Yeah, they're
Good,
amethyst.
beautiful cut too.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Nice. All right, give people one more minute before we get started. Let me remove spotlight there so I don't forget. Spotlight me. Wendy, you have something? Was that you waving? Oh, so I saw the hand go wavy.
I was saying hi to Betsy.
Oh.
I was in gallery view and I was waving to Betsy. Hi, everybody.
Gotcha. Hi. So I'm going to say this hopefully at least 3 times during today's session. There's not going to be a session in 2 weeks on 6/15. I have some family stuff that I'm taking care of instead, but we will return to the same bat channel on, what is that going to be? The 7/6 date is the next date then? July 6th we will return. So nothing on the 15th. We'll return on the 6th. And again, I'll say that a couple times so that people joining late can catch it. What are we at for numbers? We got 13 folks. Okay, I think we can get started. So first things first, the magical board is taken apart a little bit because I've been pulling things that we're going to set. So it's still there. Oops, wrong direction. Still there. We got all the little spots for things once they're set to go back in place. But for right now, a lot of the stones and the settings are taken off the board because I've been prepping things since I don't have a whole lot of good hot water resource down in my studio, even with a little boiler thing that I got. So I had to pre-set a bunch of things today. Install them in whatever material we're going to set them from. So I did a bunch of setting the settings in things. That'll make more sense when we get to the discussion of all the various materials. So what we also have to talk about is what we finished last time, which was the last setting in chapter 3, the little cap, which has since been cleaned up a bit. And it's as you may remember, we put a little post all the way through, so it will also have the ability. I'll have the ability to put a little bit of epoxy in there to help hold it, but we are going to eventually get to setting that with a little cut layer around it. And then we're going to inset a little wire nice and solidly set when we get to that setting. So that was the one setting we did last time. And now we are on to a boatload of settings, and we'll see how many I can do in the time we have. What I've done is I've selected a series of ones that I think cover all the different concepts we need to cover, because we don't literally need to set every round and every oval that I did, but I picked a bunch of them to show where they vary. So we've got some thin and some thick bezel walls. We've some faceted and some not faceted. We've got some of the unusual setting. In fact, we've got most of the unusual settings. We're going to start out today with a heavy walled bezel. And then on things like cornering, I gave us a couple different versions when he's, oops, this is really bright. Hang on a sec. Let me get a little bit darker on this screen just so that you guys can see a little bit. Is that better? Don't get so much glare. Okay, so I did both versions of the corners that he does on his. So we'll do one where we've cut back the corners and one where we're going to saw into the corners as we go. And then we've got the combo prong setting. We've got the rough setting. We have all those unusual ones where we're working on caps and things like that, or reverse setting, or tongue setting. So I've prepped a whole bunch of these, but I'm going to talk to you about the things that go into setting these materials. And I will give you the codicil that I don't tend to use this stuff. Oops, adjust my camera is out of focus. Is it really? There's not a whole lot of focusing I can do on this one. This one is either there or it's not. Is that any better? Too close, too far away?
Too close.
Too close. Other direction.
That's better.
How's that?
Yeah. What's all
Okay.
that? What's all that yellow and all that stuff around it?
So that's what we're going to talk about, some of the setting materials that John mentions in the book. And so we're actually scooting back to page 50 in one of the earlier chapters. And on page 50, he talks about securing the work for setting. So I got multiple chats and I can't see them all. Hang on a sec. Let's see what we've got. Chats. Deborah, I think it may be on your end that you're not getting full power. You might want to try stepping out of the meeting and then coming back in, and maybe it won't be so pixelated for you. So on that chapter, he talks about a variety of materials into which you can put your work in order to set it. And the one that he goes into great detail on is the shellac, which I'm going to go grab some of because I forgot to bring it over to the bench. So shellac is quite literally the stuff that we coat wood with. Okay, so it's these little chips of the dried paint type stuff, and I've just got it in a well-cleaned can, a cat food can. And this is meltable over a low flame. You don't want to put it in under your torch, it'll scorch, and I think it might even catch fire. So what we're doing for setting this stuff down is we're heating it and sticking it on either a wood dowel or a chunk of wood if you want something flush and flat. And I'm going to be using a basic heating, not kerosene lamp, but an alcohol lamp like you would use for your wax working. So I'm going to work with those combos of things in some of our settings. I'm going to work with these other two materials. This is jet ballistic. There's jet set and there's jet ballistic. They may not be making both of them anymore. The jet ballistic has Kevlar added to it, making it a little more brittle and sturdy at the same time. And then jet basic is what it used to be called, or jet set is a little bit clearer. This is a poor man's version of jet. And this is stuff that you can find in your local craft store. It's called Friendly Plastic, and it all comes in bead form.
Rachel,
And-
you broke up when you were saying the name.
Oh, sorry. This is Friendly Plastic. There's lots of other names for it, but what you're looking for is any of the craft plastic that comes in beads that you basically were heating either of these two up in hot water and until it gets sort of plasticine-y, clay-like, and then forming it to hold the pieces in place. Not stuff that I use a lot of. I use this stuff for other projects, but not for this. They're also both great for making handles for tools. There's all kinds of things, and there's lots and lots of videos online about it. There's some conflicting info out there. Some places say that you can safely microwave the material if it's in plastic. The Rio site definitively says about jet ballistic, do not microwave it. So I'm not trying that route in any way. But what you do need is fairly hot water and some kind of pokey stick so that you're not putting your hands into the scalding water. And there's a certain temperature range that you want to work in, which is listed on each material has slightly different temperature zones. The jet ballistic, by all reports, will break down if you get it too hot. So you got to be careful. So I did boiling water on my stove top with a couple of bowls. And then I also had a bowl of ice water beside it to quench it in, just cool it down fast. So you don't need that. It can sit on out and just cool in a matter of a few minutes. But it's heating it up and squishing it. And I will tell you from my experimentation, you'll see people all over the place talking about this stuff and making sure that when you're done with it, you leave it quite flat. They are not kidding. I made the mistake of making far too big a piece with my first chunk. And it took me about 20 minutes of boil, scrape a bunch off, boil, scrape a bunch off, like hot water, peeling it down until I got it flat. So whenever you're not using it, or even when you are, try to keep it fairly thin because it doesn't need a whole lot. What this is doing is giving us some stability to hold an otherwise challenging object to get our setting in. And so 2 different ways to go about that. Flat surface that's going to rest on something, could put down some leather or something that'll keep it from slipping, or something that you can grip. So on these, I've made a little handle for it, and you can grip it in your ring mandrel, and then use your ring mandrel against your bench pin, so out of focus, against your bench pin for support, any number of ways that you can do it. This will also work in one of those little setting balls, which I'll pull over in just a sec so you can see how that looks. So in the setting ball, we would just close it around it. And we'll do some of each in this series of settings that we're going to do. So you can grip it. That's a little tall for that one, just one of the small ones. So you can grip it here. You could, in the flat, you could actually put it between the pegs if you make it small enough so that you don't have to have it gripped between. But whatever you're doing, you're stabilizing it. In the case of putting it in the setting ball, that's giving you the access to really rotate it around, right? So lots of choices. Oh, do I ever trim it to use an engraving ball? Yes, I do. That's exactly what I'm using here. Did I miss anybody else's chat questions? Hang on. My chat is lagging behind everything else today. Yes, so Deborah, you use Jet Set a lot? Okay, she's answering on text. Yes, Deborah uses it a lot. Do you use the Jet Set or the Jet Basic or the Jet Ballistic? The yellow stuff?
Can you hear me talking?
Now I can, yep.
Okay. Yeah, I use it in the classroom a lot for all different things from wood to metal. And it's
Nice.
great for everything. And I've used it for tools, especially things that are hard to hold, you know, like stamps.
Yep. Yeah, comfort handles is one of the big things that you'll see online. And Rio has a couple good videos there too about shaping something to just the way your fingers hold it. Like for a file handle, if you don't like the big clunky ones that are not often fitted to small hands, then you can make one that's just the size and direction you want for support. There's also, Jane Redmond uses a variant of this. I don't know whether she's using a friendly plastic or a jet to make custom tools for shaping your metal. So if you're trying to make a repeatable shape, you make the curve that you want to follow, and you might make a little hook on the end of it so that you can catch things into it. It's great. You can shape all different kinds of functionality out of it. For setting, you want stability. If you've got a stone that's poking through in some way, you want to make sure that you're not pushing that in a way that might damage the stone if you put pressure down on it. So we're going to have some interesting attempts at setting our reverse setting. I'm going to debate which way I want to position this. This one right now is the one that we would put a ring in there and set it over the ring. And I don't think I like the way that's holding for that. So I'm not sure I would, it may have too much force against it if you push the stone against it too hard. So all of those are methods of attaching, and I'm going to do a quick little on the fly melting of some of the shellac. John recommends that you not use straight shellac, but you put a pinch or two of plaster of Paris in it. And so I gotta figure out where I put my plaster of Paris. Of course, it's up on the high shelf. Maybe I have enough in there from the last time I did this. We'll see. That just makes it a little less sticky because this is quite sticky by the time you get going. I had to run out this afternoon to buy matches because I realized I have no actual matches in the house, and now I've got to figure out where I put them down. Matches, there we go. Sorry, it's been a chaotic work week, so I'm a little frazzled. Let's see. haven't done any wax working in a while, so I'm hoping that my torch is still gonna, I mean, my equipment is still gonna light well. Good. So if you don't use one of these a lot, just remember that this kind of alcohol is hard to see if it spills anywhere, even when it's on fire. So make sure that you are aware of pinching out your flame, capping it. And I tend to, when I know I'm not going to use it for a while, I tend to empty all the alcohol out of it just because it's going to evaporate through the wick, no matter how snug your little cap is. So, and this is, you're going to want to use some tweezers to hold this because it will get hot. This is just a matter of sitting here and heating, right? Until it starts to melt and it becomes gooey. I'm going to not make you guys sit for 10 minutes of me melting something, but rather put that down on the stove. I'm going to do warming up of something that I already put stuff on. Let's up a little bit. So you can see it starts to smoke and bubble. And you want to get it just a little gummy. Get it centered a little bit more so you guys can see this better.
Rachel,
Yeah.
when you say a pinch, do you mean a pinch or do you mean?
He has a spoon or two, I think, but it depends on your proportions. I haven't done more than put, you know, a tablespoon when I was doing a full container of the shellac for this big object that I put it on.
Okay.
I think you're going to have to experiment to see how much you like or don't like the sticky factor. That's definitely not there yet. So this bubbles, you got to be careful. You don't want to drip it on yourself because it will burn seriously. Because it's pretty nasty gumminess factor. Yeah, this is not going to be big enough for this particular setting. What else do I have that I can put in there? I'm going to try our bezel cap. No. Of course, I put all the good ones in other things. Let's see what else I've got that's small. So it's getting it's sort of the bubble factor of like a toffee at the top, and it starts to get drippy. There. You want to make sure it's not sticking up so much that the stone will push against it. And you definitely want to move it around with a tool of some kind rather than put your fingers in it. And just like with the other materials, all I'm doing is making sure that I've got a couple spots. Yeah, this piece is too big for this one. Bear with me, gang, while I get something smaller to set in there. So all I'm doing is pushing the material up. You can see how it's like caramel by the time it's good to go. And you'll know if you start burning it, it's going to get sort of charred on the top. So don't go that far. Try to get it somewhere before you get to char stage. So I'm putting this one down in here and just making sure that I can still get to all the material that I need to actually be able to push down. So I don't want it too high up on the bezel if I'm going to push a lot of this bezel down. And then I'm going to let it cool for a long time because I don't want to have any of the hot material. When I'm working, I want it to be nice and solid. So we'll set that aside. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get my flame to get this one hot enough. So that's one material. This material is, again, literally, let me pull out some of the beads so you guys can see the difference between the two. Oh, my Friendly Plastic is actual brand name Friendly Plastic. So this is the Friendly Plastic. It's used in theatrical prop making. It's not food safe, but like you can have it in your mouth. So I know people who make tooth prosthetics for vampires and stuff like that, that kind of stuff. And it's just these little pellets. When you put them in hot enough water, after a minute or two, they go clear. And that's when you can start poking around at them. I just used a chopstick or something like that to poke around at it in the heat. And then once it starts to stick together, then you can pull it out and mold it with tweezers and or your hands once it cools off just enough that you're not going to hurt yourself. This is the Jet Ballistic, same bead format, just a little bit finer bead. And I would say that so far, before I've actually said anything against either of them, my preference for setting things into position is definitely the friendly plastic. This stayed a little too malleable, too long for me to easily, like I'd position something and think I had it, and then it would move on me. Whereas on this, it cools off quickly enough that it was really holding in place. But the trick is, you've got to judge what you're holding. So you find spots that if you push in and push the plastic around it, it won't gum up the works, but it'll keep holding whatever's there pretty stable. And then you have to always remember to, if you've got a pass through on it, you got to push all the material in the center out of the way. I'm not even sure that my stone will go into this one because I may not have pushed it enough out of the way. I can't remember whether this was a high facet or a small low facet on the bottom. What else did I learn? So some of the round ones, it's about pinching up and over the edge of whatever you're doing. Again, you got to leave access all the way around to the bezel wall that you're going to be pushing against. And these same principles apply whether it's the shellac, the jet, or the friendly plastic. What else? What did I discover? I think those are the key factors. It's creating either a tab or a flat. So the tabs need to have something you can grip, and you don't need a whole lot, and you want to keep it thin. I learned the hard way not to put the wet plastic in my ring mandrel because it started to grab the leather that's framing this mandrel. I mean this, the ring clamp rather. So that's why I've got little bits of leather stuck in my plastic. What else? I think that's the gist of it. It's all about finding a place that you can grip. It could be that you could make a rod and you're going to put plastic on the end of it so that you can support it. It's about what your hand position is that you want to use given the setting that you're doing. And then John also talks about if you are going to be setting by hand, sometimes you want to notch something into the side of your bench pin as extra support. So whichever hand you need to hold with, you might push up against, and that'll give you something that'll counter the pressure that you're doing. Okay. Question, lapidary, Kinsley, shellac that is mixed with. Oh, so you've already got shellac for lapidary. Yeah, that's a good call out, is that there's lots of materials already out there to hold stones onto dopping sticks for the cutting. So if they're using it to hold, we can use it to hold. High shellac content wax. Ooh, no smoke. I like that. So yeah, lots of choices out there. If you find one that appeals, pop it up on our website, on the Facebook group, and let people know. Questions about any of these? Okay. I have not actually watched John set any stones in materials. I've only watched him demo when he just had a standalone stone sitting there and he was holding it with his hands. So I don't know which is his material of choice when he is actually setting for his own work. Where did I want to start? I want to start on one of the heavy bezels. So this is second or third one we made, I think. This is an 18 gauge outer wall. We pop the stone out. You see it has a cutout that we did early on. It happens to be lapis in this case. And my go-to when I'm setting heavy walled stones is to do a hammer set. I tend to go to my power hammer set for that, but we're going to try with John's techniques, doing some hammer down by hand. I'm going to put a little piece of leather down there just so I don't have slippage. And this is going to give me a little bit of support, but I have to also hold both my hammer and my nail set. Actually, no, he wanted us to start this on a slightly different approach. Bear with me. So we're going to actually try and start these by hand with a bezel pusher. But we're going to talk about the different shapes of bezel pusher and the angles. So we're now flipping ahead to page 53, where we had gone there to make a pusher out of a nail in one of our earlier sessions. So this is the pusher that we made out of the nail. You can use a heavier gauge than this. This was the gauge I happened to have. And remember that we filed it down into a roughly rectangular shape, blunted it, polished it on a cutting compound of some kind. And then the important part that I had never connected with is to take a rough file and just mark it up with a couple quick strokes. It means you will see small marks potentially on your setting as you're going, but it gives it more grip, so you're less likely to go sliding across your piece if you skip around. Okay, so that's one option, is the one we made. Another option is the basic manufactured one. If you get a manufactured one, I think you can see it on there a little bit, maybe not. So the manufactured ones always come sharp. They're sort of crisp machined edges, and that is going to do you in. So knock the corners off and round everything a little bit around the edges. Again, polish on a polishing compound, and then do that tap, tap, tap to the front. Thermalock. Yes, Thermalock is a related material to the Jet Set. I think it may be a competing brand to the same material. What else do we get? So he has in there a list of things that he makes his out of, includes brass rod. So I made one out of a brass rod. The manufactured ones tend to come square. Since John seems to have a thing for the rectangular shape, I did my brass rod by hammering a round rod flat, and then again, filing and touching it up, polishing and doing that tap, tap, tap. It feels very light to me compared to some of the others, but it also feels like it's going to be softer on the material. It's not going to give as much, I don't know, it's not going to risk the scratch as much as a steel one would. This cool one I got from Chris Anderson recently at Lion Punch Forge. It has yet to be used, but he makes them out of the ends of Allen wrenches. So it's a hex that he's blunted down, polished, and in this case, he's got a high polish on it. I think I'll probably do the tap, tap, tap before I use it, but he does it completely out of repurposed hardware that he finds. So I think this was like a pull knob for a chest of drawers or something. It's got a lot of heft to it, so it feels like there'll be some good force behind the push. I want you to notice that in all cases, the ones that I'm holding are coming just from the palm to just barely beyond my fingertips. If they're longer than that, you won't have the control. So that's an important thing, is getting the setting, the positioning right of where you want them held. Pretty much all of these have about that same position. They're off by a couple millimeters at most, not even. They're all almost identical. Chris's is the shortest one of these. Right. So those are some of the tools that we can start with. I think that I am gonna blunt a little bit on the end of Chris's and then try it, because I like the heft behind it and it feels like I need a little push. So as with last time, we're talking about that north, south, east, west pushing in, but on the heavy wall bezel, he gives us a little more description. Where is he telling us to do this? On page 55. So we can use the bezel pusher for as much as we can, and your hands may or may not be able to push 18 gauge in enough. We're going to find out if my hands can, because it's been a while. And if not, we move to the setting punch and hammer method. But the same principles apply of that north, south, east, west, no matter what we're doing. And he tells us in the book what his go-to. He usually uses the shellac for when he's doing hammer setting. and then he clamps a block of it in a vise. I like a little bit more concentrated area than a big block is going to give me, or a vise. So let's see if I can do this without getting in your way when I'm doing it. So this is again an in and up a little bit. Yeah, this is going to be a challenge with an 18 gauge wall. Okay, I can get a little bit of movement. Now, as a reminder, when we made this, we beveled the top edge to give it a little bit thinner wall up at the top. So make sure that you have already done a filed bevel if you're doing a heavy wall at the top. So I'm doing my north-south, or my east-west, I guess. This will be my north-south. And just pushing in. You'll know pretty quickly if you put too much of the plastic material in the way or not enough to hold it, because it's going to start to come loose. This one's considering coming loose. So teeny tiny, I'm going to mark for you guys because it's going to be hard to see on screen. Or do you want me to zoom in? If I zoom in closer, is it going to get too fuzzy for you guys? Do you want me to try zooming in?
Try zooming in.
Try zooming in. Oop, that's way zoomed in. I don't need to be that zoomed in.
I liked it.
Yeah, that's good. Seeing it that close. It's not too fuzzy.
More centered.
Come on, little camera. Go where you're supposed to. How's that?
Great.
Okay. So what I've pushed in thus far is right here, 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 and here. Okay. And it's not going to move as quickly or as completely as it does when we're doing a thinner walled bezel. So now I'm going to be my diagonals. And this is an in more than it is an up. There's a little bit of up angle, but not more than a few degrees. Doing the opposite angles. Get all of them. I missed one, didn't I? I got that, but I didn't get. Okay, so now we've added the quadrants here, 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 and here. And you'll start to see that it's getting that wobbly look that we see in the top of page 55. We are at the second image at the top of page 55, basically. And then we're going to start doing the in-betweens. So I'm going to do, again, always opposite each other, a position, rotate, do the opposite position. Position. And it's with the heavy bezel, it's a lot harder. I'm finding myself doing the chicken wing thing that I said we don't want to do if we can help it. So I'm going to switch cameras just to show you what I'm talking about. So I'm finding because I'm pushing so hard, I'm lifting to get some of my fulcrum. But if you can keep your arm tucked in and make your angle be a little bit more pressure, you're going to be less likely to go sliding across. As soon as you chicken wing, there's more chance you're going to slide out across the stone. Okay, so keep as snug as you can. It's not always possible, but do what you can to keep tucked in. So I'm looking for all of the bumpy spots and doing the opposite side, even if it doesn't look as bumpy opposite. Until I've got a really solid fit, I'm looking for the biggest lumps and working their mate on the other side.
You're out of camera, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. I forgot to switch, didn't I? Get this a little bit more centered. Go. So the little scrap of leather is super helpful, and having just enough material here that I can hold the setting in position is proving quite nice. I've got one little lump of the plastic that is in an inconvenient spot. I let it lift up too high. So I'm doing again opposites, and I tend to mean, when I say an opposite, I tend to mean like diagonally opposite when I'm on an oval. So I don't want to do here and here. I want to do here and here, here and here. Because what we're doing is trying to keep an even build of the hold down pressure. If you don't balance, what you're getting is you're risking pushing up one side over the other, so the stone may lift up. And I'm finding that my piece is popping out. Let's see if we have to keep it in there or if that's enough to hold it to start. So I'm looking for lumps. It's definitely handier to be able to hold it down with my fingers, but this is a big enough setting that I'm not having too much trouble just holding it. What I am starting to have trouble with is getting the metal to move in response to this push, which means hopefully I'm starting to get a little bit of material over the stone enough to start holding it. It's definitely still in its wobbly phase. Like I might, yeah, I could still push this out if I tried to. So I've got a ways yet to go for the first pass. And the amount of muscle and effort that this takes is part of why I use a mechanized hammer handpiece for thick bezels. Because this is a bit of a workout. So I'm looking for spots that are really still sticking out, looking for that fingernail gap that still appears in certain spots. We're starting to lower the amount of movement the stone has. Okay. And because this is a thick walled bezel, we're going to go back to hammer set on this one for the sake of John's exercise, which is John recommended that we maybe even start with hammer set on what I'm doing by hand right now. I just wanted to see if I could even push this much material. But he's on the thick walled bezels, he's counting on a subsequent course of downward pressure with the hammer set, which will definitely help push this into place. So first pass is the up and in, or the, excuse me, the in and slight up. And then the second pass is the downward force. If you think about it on the curve of the stone, we're starting to go from upright walls to just barely bent over. The downward force will start to compress it closer to the stone. But if we haven't gotten at least a little bit of a curve in there, then all we're doing is trying to press straight down on a wall, and the force will, we'll just be fighting ourselves. So it has to have that starting angle against which the force will work.
Rachel,
Sure.
if you were using a hammer hand piece on this to start out with,
Yep.
would you be doing the same action with your hand? Is it push and then sort of
So
tilt, or is it
Yeah.
just straight push in to the side?
let me think about that, because when I'm using, so I have an actual hammer hand piece, meaning one of the micromotor type hand
Yeah,
pieces.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and because that has the stop and go factor on it, I tend to try and keep that touching my material no matter what I'm doing. So I work a little stretch instead of having a single spot. I would work, like a quarter of the width and then a quarter of the width on the other side, just being cautious about how
I
much.
see.
And so that lets me, I'm still taking the same position, but I'm using the bounce of the hammer to do that push in. I'll pull out my hammer, my micromotor and hammer at some point. And I don't know if we'll get to it this session, but I'll do it at some point so you guys can see the difference. Yeah, and then, and I would also probably, I think instead of using a square, I would probably, my go-to when I'm starting bezels with the hammer handpiece is usually the wide rectangle, the Wayne Werner bits that Fordham sells, or hammer tips that they sell are really wonderful. Again, just like with any of these tools, you'd want to blunt certain edges on them. So I use either the rectangle or the, I actually use the curved one more than I use a bezel rocker, because it's so much smaller and more controlled. And then I use the square one a lot. And that the rest of the hammer tips pretty much sit in my container and I do nothing with them.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Everybody's going to find different tools that are going to be the right ones for your hand strength, for your focus on how you're pushing. This is really just me talking through trying what John is describing in terms of directionality. And I'm sort of running out of ability to push, even though there's a fairly good sized gap. I'm just not getting much further. Remember, it's going to be work hardening as we do this bend too, so it gets progressively harder. Other questions? Did I interrupt somebody from asking? Showing it all. So I've still got a fair amount. In fact, yeah, I'm just starting to get to the point where I can't force it out of the setting, but you can see I can get, whoop, I can if I go angled. So I'm not near enough to holding it in place for sure. So I'm going to have to switch to hammer set. All kinds of devices that you can use for actual hammer setting. This being one of the cheapest. This is that masonry nail that I mentioned in earlier sessions. I've once again blunted it to that shape. My recommendation is make one that goes this way and make one that goes this way, if you can, because you're going to find that your fingers, especially if you're using one of the wide ones, your fingers want to hold it at certain angles at certain times. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this without it being in the plastic. So we may have to try and see if I can get that reset with the water. Or I can set it up in the setting ball. Might as well use the tool I got. So let me do that. Let's see how the pegs work for this little guy, because they are definitely not as highly manufactured as when you pay the big bucks for one of the GRS gravers. So we got lots of choices in any of these. Some are rubberized. Oops, sorry, I'm out of frame. Let me go back out a little bit. Come on, zoom. Oh my goodness, guys, sorry. It wants to go lighter, but not zoomier. So the GRS system comes with fancier and higher quality ones of all these different pegs. But you can see there's some where it's going to hold flat. There's some where it's going to hold, you've got something you can put into it so that it stays in place. You can use combinations of them. Let's see, for the oval, I'm thinking we may actually want to make use of the ones that we've got that match. There we go. And yeah, this is going to be a little iffy. Let's see if that gives me enough grip. So that's going to not hold down enough. I suspect that, among other things, the GRS ones fit more snugly. So these are very loose. They're better pegs. If anybody has played around with their setup more than I have and has ideas for how to keep things snug, please speak up.
I haven't tried, but I heard someone saying that they use chopsticks.
To lock it down?
Yeah,
Huh.
I don't know. I mean, I got it and I haven't used it, but yeah, this person was saying that they use chopsticks. But I'm not
Just
quite
sort of
sure
jammed
where.
in to make it a snugger.
Probably,
position?
I don't know.
I've used them in the classroom using the better ones, and I know some of us wound up using pieces of hardwood and other things that worked as good.
Okay.
I think even with the best one, they're hard to grip.
Yeah. Maybe it's just about being tighter on the setting. So, well, let's see. I'll see if I can play with it. That's what we're here for. So ideally, this is going to give me a better angle. So what I'm looking for is to come in at the same angle that I was able to push at, and that I can still control where I've got my hammer, where I've got my set. You can buy setting tools, or again, I just like to make mine because then I can shape them how I want. And the thing about hammer setting that takes a little time to train yourself to is the sound is what's really important when you're working. There's a different noise when you're pushing the metal down and there's air between it versus when there is, you're hitting stone, and you'll hear the change in the tone when we get to that stage, and you want to stop ideally right before you get to that stage. I want this a little bit more. So again, if you high polished, just bang it up a little bit to give it some friction. It's not enough. I need a coarser file. More grip. So I'm angling, tap, tap, still keeping consideration, flipping it and doing a little bit on the other side. So hammer setting, I'm doing a little bit more of a stretch, especially since I was able to put the first batch of it down by hand. Work the ends. Just keep in mind that the reason we're flipping is so that we don't get pushing up unevenly. That's especially noticeable on faceted stones. It's a little easier to do a cast without problems. But if it's, especially if it's a snug fit, it'll lift one side. Question?
I have a question about the way you're hammering.
Yeah.
I would have thought it would be like a mallet or something, not like steel on steel. I mean, it's the first time I see that.
So I find that that a small hammer like this gives me a feeling of response from the material. If I use a mallet, it sort of blunts against the hit, against the set in a way that doesn't tell me if I'm hitting hard enough. And I'm hitting so lightly on this that the reason for steel on steel avoidance is really so that you don't break one piece of steel with the other.
Okay.
And I'm not hitting either part hard enough that that's a risk. John doesn't, I don't think John specifies what hammer he recommends. I think there's drawings that imply either a goldsmith's hammer like this or a riveting hammer. I can't remember whether he actually outlined what he would use. But you could try it with a brass mallet. I mean, try it with anything you want. I just find I can't feel the metal's response when I'm working with say a wooden or a rawhide mallet. So what I'm really looking for as I look for these bumps at this point is any place where it's still far away from the wall of the stone. I'm trying to work the biggest gaps inward.
Rachel,
Yep.
in the picture on page 56, where he's showing the hammer setting, he's showing a chasing hammer.
Oh, chasing hammer. Thank you. Good. And I don't think I even own it. Oh, I do own it. Maybe I own a chasing hammer. It's got an awfully round front for it. Yeah, try what's going to work for you. And try different styles and see what you can control and what you can't. Back this off a little bit because it's lifting out. I think I'm gonna see if I have any other tools. The other thing I like about these is you can work more than one direction. So you can do a wider hit if you have an area that needs a little more convincing. And there's two sizes of these. So there's the wide end and then there's the narrower end, and those make great surfaces for hammer set. So what I'm doing right now with this touching up on the sides is just trying to get some of the long edge to get a little more even. I'm just doing a little bit. So we're still a little messy around the edges, but it's a fairly complete first course. Let me see, there's a couple lumps that are going to bug me. What I'm discovering quite quickly is that this setting is not as snug a fit as I thought it was. So I had several of these stones. I may have grabbed the wrong one of the lapis when I pulled the stone for setting, or I just made too big of a setting. That's also quite the possibility. All right, so I'm going to start doing the downward push that you showed, that same page 56. Where we're pushing downward. If this were on a ring, he's got an example of it set on a ring mandrel. But we're going to start shifting to, again, a straight down along the top edge, remembering that we already filed this top edge down, which will help it flush up a little bit. A little bit on one
Rachel,
side.
could you
Pardon?
just kind of, I know you have to have your hand there, but just show me the angle with, so, okay.
So it really is literally straight up and down on the
Okay.
metal.
Thank you.
And that's why, again, you want to train your ear to start listening, because there's going to come a point when we're pushing down and we're tapping and it's touching stone. See if I can hold it a little bit more. Yeah, but my fingers are going to be in the way of what's actually physically going on no matter what I do. Does having it upright help? Instead of tucking it towards me? Is that showing it all?
Yeah, that's showing kind of, sort of.
So the downward push is starting to flatten the material in towards the stone. And so the heavy bezel set, remember that when we did the heavy bezel sets, he talked about it being towards the shorter side of the height that he recommends. He was talking about between 1/4 and 1/3 of the way up the cab. I know that's 11 sessions ago, 10 sessions ago, something like that. But because it's a thicker wall, it's going to push a little bit more solidly against the stone. I'm not saying that right. It's going to have less distance to move to be gripping the stone, and won't easily come loose from it the way that a lighter weight bezel would if it got caught on something, or had a lot of action getting something underneath it. Whatever. There's lots of ways that it would start to come undone. So the thicker bezel has a little more opportunity to hold at a shorter height.
Rachel,
Yep.
are you placing the punch directly on top of the bezel when you're doing this?
Yes, on the top wall of the bezel,
Okay.
where we have already filed down.
Yes.
I'm being very careful, more careful than I have been in one corner of this stone, to not be hitting the stone. So what this is doing, per John's directions to us, is compressing the metal down, sort of squinching it in a different direction than when we were going in from the side. just a moment, when I finish this pass, I'm going to show you guys how it's looking, because you'll start to see where the downward push is changing the face of the top of the bezel. It's getting messy. And I suspect that what I need is to polish up a couple of these nails so that I can use them as like chasing course, even though this is kind of chasing in the way that I'm using it. I need one that's going to be a smoother chase. And that we've also got steps in the directions to file and finish off with some flex shaft tools. So I'm going to pause there, and we're definitely past the it's moving out stage. In fact, we're past the it's moving stage. So because it's a thick wall bezel, there's gapping in here still that I would not be thrilled by if I left it that way. But just that downward pressure turned it from having the ability to sort of slide around and pop out if I angled it to it's not going anywhere at this stage of the game. And I don't know if it's showing well. I may have to go. Let me go over to the other camera and see if we can get a close up on the good camera. So, okay, stay in camera. So the edging that I just did, it's made it quite lumpy and I need to clean it up a lot. But what that's got is the straight down pressure compressing over the curve that we didn't get from pushing in from the side. Is that showing enough at all? Can you guys see a little bit of what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And it's
Yes,
definitely
it's
a nice
showing.
look. Pardon?
It's showing. Yeah, it's nice.
Okay, good. Let me see if I can get any closer. Let's see if that's going to focus. Where are we?
Oh, yes.
Is that going to focus? Still too close to focus. Oh, there we go.
There, that's good.
So you can see how much texture, because each of those hammer blows is putting down a mark. And so I have to keep doing this until I've got a fairly smooth surface that we're going to further clean up with files and or gravers and or polishing wheels of various sorts. But now that stone, there's not an iota of movement in the stone right now. So this is physically set in that it won't fall out. But it's sure not pretty yet. There's a long way to go. Questions?
I have a question about, you said it was 18 gauge on the outside,
Yeah.
and what was it in the inside?
The back plate, this wasn't a step bezel. So I think the
Oh.
back plate was 22, it looks like.
Okay.
Yeah. Give or take, somewhere in that neighborhood. Might have been
Rick?
as little as 24.
Rachel?
Other questions?
I wanted to jump back to page 50. I think it was 50,
Yep.
55. And on the right-hand side in the picture that's the lower right, it
Yep.
said coat the end of the dowel with shellac or chaser's cement. And he talks about that chaser's cement a couple of places. Is that just the, what is that?
So he may be talking about pitch, a chaser's pitch.
Yeah,
Which,
okay.
that comes in different degrees of pitchiness, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
I didn't go out and get that because, man, that stuff stinks up your studio. And it's easy to burn. I'm
Thank
told that Liza Nichamkin Glazer makes a really great one because she's master chaser. So if you're looking for one, that's somebody to go looking for pitch. And she sells it by the block. But I haven't personally used it, so I can't say whether it's especially good for stone setting. It's certainly good for chasing the way that she chases. Any other questions before I keep going back to a little more tippy tap to see if I can get this a little cleaned up? Okay, I'm gonna not torture you guys with too much more of this. I just want to show you what the next pass is going to get for cleanup on all those lumps and bumps. If I'm a little more careful and not entirely yapping while not paying attention. Let me get in there. Good angle. So my next downward pass, I'm going to try to behave with the hand, hammer, and nail the same way that I would if I were using my hammer hand piece, which is that I'm trying to not lift the nail off of it on this round. I'm trying to let it run its course, tapping over each prior tap as I move around. I'm not doing a great job because the piece wants to move out from underneath. So each little tap, I'm letting it scoot forward on its own along the wall in an attempt to clean up some of the messy taps from the prior course. It's still not going to be perfect because I really definitely need to give myself a polished tool. Of course. Yeah, I think we're discovering why you pay for a full-on GRS if you can afford it.
I've seen where they've literally put the bezel on a piece of wood,
Yeah,
like you did with the shellac, I
Right.
mean, the jet. And then
Yep.
that goes in between. So it's actually holding the wood, and then the stone itself is free from the attachment.
yeah. If it hadn't come off of the jet, I would still be working this on the jet, I think. And you know, we don't do a whole lot of setting stones in midair. Most of our stones are connected to something. So there's a little more support than these freestanding ones that we're doing.
Well, we learned. That's all I could say. I
Yep.
haven't used mine, so.
Yeah, this is new equipment to me for sure. I do wish I had bought one long ago though, because I like the movement of it. At some point I will probably spring for a proper GRS. I just didn't want to commit to that price point until I had made sure that it was something that I would actually functionally use.
Isn't there someone? I'm sorry,
Pardon?
isn't there someone in this group that has one and doesn't use it?
I don't know. So again, this course is really a cleanup course. So it's still that straight up and down. If I were using my hammer hand piece, I'd probably be on the rectangular one or maybe on the square one. Think of if you've done any construction of objects where you're forging them, think of this as that course that you do to even out all the lumps and bumps from prior courses, finishing courses on them. So just by being able to hold this down and scoot it along, I'm already feeling a lot happier about the cleanup that's happening underneath it. That's close to a course. So let me bring it back to the other camera again. And you can see just that one. Oops, I gotta switch cameras properly though. So that pass, where are we? There we go. Has already started smoothing a lot more around the edge. So there's still markings because I'm using a nail that needs a little bit more polish than it has right now. But that course took out a lot of the big marks along it, and a few more rounds of that. And then finishing up with filing would certainly speed things up. But I'm gonna show you, because I don't want you to sit here for hours on one stone. I hope you get the gist of that. What we would next move on to, once I was happy with the hammering, oops, gotta switch cameras again. What I'd next move on to is the barrette file that we have treated by filing down the edges. So John talks about this on, where's the page? On page 57. Using a fine cut barrette needle file, such as a number 4, the edges of which have been sanded bright and free of any roughness. So this happens to be one that also got ground down to give myself other functionality, but make sure that there is no tooth to either edge for the file. And I did that by just going on the, excuse me, the coarse to finer grit along the edges on the sandpaper. And then I actually, as much as it probably makes some people cringe, I actually put it on the polishing wheel, on a cutting wheel, just being careful to only hit the upper edge. I didn't want to take down the teeth, and then cleaned it and dried it off really carefully so that I have something that is not likely to scratch my stone as I work my way around that upper lip that we were just working when we were hammering. So, of course, I've chosen a very soft stone as my first choice. So this is not a great sample because lapis will scratch when you think too hard at it. But getting in there and just filing down more of the lumpiness. Yeah, this is too soft a stone for this. So this is not a good stone to be filing next to, even with a well polished up piece. Getting a little banged up already, but it's taking down that edge. That's one way to do it. I would, again, I'd do a couple more circuits with the nail first and then go to this. And then another option that he refers to is using one of several different kinds of buff wheels or polishing wheels. My personal favorite is the Swifty brand, which I've only seen at a couple places. Contenti sells them, and they come in a couple different cuts. They come in a blade cut and they come in this flat cut. But Swifty, at like SWIFTY. And one of the reasons I like them is that they don't mar stones, and they do blend solder lines really nicely. Joy Raskin introduced me to these, and I thank her every time I use them in my head because I love them so much. This one is worn down. They are much bigger when they come out. Let me get my package so you guys can see the label on those. Auto Fry might sell them. I know Contenti is the place I usually have to go, but somebody found them elsewhere recently. It's my Swifty wheels. Bear with me a sec. I've been cleaning enough that I can't find anything. Swifty, there we go. And it's the bluish gray ones. And they come in this knife cut, or they come in several sizes.
I mean, not today.
Pardon? What was that? Oh, nothing?
I'm sorry.
No,
I
that's
didn't
okay.
realize I wasn't on mute.
That's okay. So these are really nice because they can get in here and just take down the bumps and lumps. Do be careful if you're working on something with patterns, because they will fairly quickly wear them down. But it's a nice edging. You can also, John talks about doing a final buff of it, and he talks about using a felt wheel. This is the smallest I've found in terms of thickness. I would really love, if anybody has a place that they know sells either a knife edge felt or a much thinner felt wheel. This is a little big for working on these kinds of things, but this, you can just make sure you mark them the same as you would your polishing compound wheels on a bigger machine. So I'd only do a red rouge, or I'd only do a cutting compound. I would not use a cutting compound near my stone. Or this is one that I'm going to try at some point when we get some of these a little more finished, because it's It's made out of the buff material that you get, excuse me, the polishing cloth material, sunshine. It's a sunshine wheel. And so you don't add any compound to this one. It's going to get grubby when you use it, but you don't like make sure that you've got no other compounds on there. And this is just a straight up polishing buff. And they're both obviously available in larger wheels as well. So those are some of the things that we would do to clean this once we got it done. And the other thing that I will come back with this better set and show you guys on a later session is the bright cut, which, did I pull out my graver? Hang on a sec. Graver. I very carefully pulled my graver out and sharpened it for us so that I would have it. Oh, there it is. So the graver, which shouldn't be coming out of its handle, doing a bright cut along the top a little bit at a time. And John has a tiny amount of the graver information in this early settings section, but a lot of his graver stuff is in the chapter on graver settings, including how to fit these to your hand and how to grind them and tighten, sharpen them. So this is one of my least favorite things ever, is to sharpen these puppies. He's taught me every class that I've taken. I've asked him to repeat his directions and it doesn't stick with me. It's about how you position it relative to your grinding stone. And making sure that you do a final tap into wood so that whatever the grind on it has been, the extra material, just like we get when we're filing something, is tapped off of it, and that it's sharp enough that it catches your fingernail when you put it into your fingernail, just a little bit. And then once you've got that, what you're doing is not pushing in and down like we do with certain other tools. It's really a scrape across the top of the line to get the bright cut off of it. And you're taking off microscopic little flakes as you do it. So I will make sure that I have my graver better set in the handle and do a demo of that once I have a well set stone, because you don't want to do that in advance of having everything cleaned up otherwise.
I was trying, like I literally tried. I have 2 different sanding blocks. I brought it with me. I'm actually away for a week.
Okay.
And I literally watched like 5 different YouTube videos, and everybody does it differently, like either in an 8 or just back and forth. But once they say the heel, you just do a little bit at the end for the heel. It just wouldn't cut anymore for me. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be able to guide you terribly much more than that, because that's where I struggle too, is getting just the right angle to get the cut. I know there are expensive tools out there designed specifically to hold your graver in exactly the right angle for grinding, that are used with the high-end power gravers and stuff. I've never even played with one. I don't think I've even seen one in person. But that, yeah, I like every time it's pretty much just practice. Whenever John teaches me, I practice and practice and practice. And I think I have it in my muscle memory, and then I have to practice it again. So, yeah, play with the angles, and also don't get cheap gravers. That's the other thing I learned the hard way. Cheap gravers are really, really bad. So,
well, I got the ones you suggested.
Yeah, good.
Conti,
yeah, so
I think it was.
I think it was either Auto Fry or Contenti. I think I was pointing at whatever
Fry,
John had given us when we were doing the stone setting class with him. Yeah. And
then I'm
and then it's about getting the triangle pose to hold things in place. That's what it is getting the angle and practicing. And the oil, making sure you've got oil on your stone, but not too much oil. But I do a lousy job with it, and I am open to anybody who can give tips to like what was the eureka moment for you, if you've got good tips on sharpening rather.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I wish I could help you more on that one. Somebody posted, thank you, Deborah, there's knife edge felt at, Helen says knife edge felt at Auto Fry. And Deborah says cutting edge supply. I haven't even heard of them. Oh, an Etsy store. and Widget Supply Grobet makes them. Contenti. Okay, so lots of choices. I just have not looked enough for my felt edge tiny wheels like this. Okay, so I'm going to put this one aside so you guys don't have to see me tap, 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 and we're going to work on some of the other settings. What was number 2 on my to-do list? Rectangle with curved settings. So let me go back to this camera. And where did I put the rectangle? So when we got to rectangles were what, 3rd or 4th setting we did, I think. And of course I made this a little too tall for this guy. So I'm gonna put it on the side. Nope. So the cornering, John gives 2 different methods of how to handle corners. And I will say this, almost every other stone setting instruction that I've gone through handles corners differently than John does. Most people that I've talked to say set the corners first, and John does the opposite. And I think the difference is that he has these 2 techniques for how he takes the corners down. And he's talking, I think we can probably find this in the square setting section on, where is this rectangle? Method 2. Where does he talk about cornering? And I'm gonna find this for you as a reference point, and then we'll just try it. On page 73. Setting bezels with angular corners. So the 2 approaches that he gives us on 73 and 74 are doing the sawing into the corners method as you're pushing down, and that leaves a sharp, crisp corner, or doing the pre-file, which is what I'm doing first. And this is just a 22 gauge bezel. And hopefully you guys can see, goodness, I got the brightness up again. Let me get it darker so you can see a little better. So hopefully you can see that I've done a consistent job all the way around of filing down my corners, but not so low that it goes below the material. Remember, especially with faceted stones on corners, you're going to want to use a ball burr and drill out a little spot.
Rachel, could you
Yep.
zoom in on that and then come back out?
Zoom in. That close enough? Try to stay in frame. I can also bring it over to the other camera where it'll get a better
Well,
cut.
okay, I just wanted to see how you filed, which one you were doing. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's literally the arch image that he shows on the upper right of page 74. And he shows the the text under it. It starts, an alternate method is to file the top edge. So that's what I've emulated in this particular one. I carved a curve. Oop, I'm now so far zoomed in, you aren't seeing what I'm waving my hands at. Okay, I'm not an an Apple phone fan. Sorry, guys. I mean to make you dizzy. Come on, zoom.
Rachel,
Yep, there we go.
when you say you filed the corners down, does that mean you decrease the height of the bezel?
Only
On
in
the
the corners.
corners?
Yeah, here, let me bring
Yeah.
this over to the other bench so you guys can see it close up because it's going to be a lot easier. If I can get in the frame. So literally just took down the corner,
I see.
and it makes a nice elegant look, but you'll see it's going to look very different from the top than a fully squared off one. Oop.
So that's why it's rounded then.
Yep. Yeah, just to give a nice line. I mean, you could do that as a sharp corner, but it would be a little awkward when it hits the point at which the at which it shifts from a corner, you know, from when it becomes a sharp drop off, it's going to be a little awkward. If you want a fully covered piece, if you want a consistent thickness appearing all the way around your stone, then you use the other method that we're going to do. And I have one set for that too. It may be a little too deeply set in the plastic, but we'll see. That we're going to do the technique where you saw down in the corners and set from there. Okay. And I want you to, so we don't need to set every possible variation of cornered stones. For you to remember these base principles, they work with our marquees if we want to. They work with our pear shape if you want to. Any of these could have been filed down at the points to give a similar curve. And all of them have that same, make sure you put a ball burr in there where your sharp point is going to hit, especially on faceted stones. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm starting again. Let's see, I really like the heft of the setting tool that Lion Punch Forge made, but I'm going to swap around just so we can see what some of the other ones are like too. So this is the handmade brass one made from brass rod. I think I posted it in the group. There's an Amazon set of brass rods in varying sizes so that you can make a bunch for about, you know, handles plus the metal. The metal was like $10 for 6 different sizes. And again, John is one of those people that doesn't do the corners first. A lot of people do because they say if you're going to compress the metal at the corners, then you have room to push it outward. I must have learned from John early on because I have never, ever done corners first. I always do my north, south, east, west, and then work my way out to the corners after I've done a lot more work on it. I gave myself a little too little space on this side for getting my press downs there, but we'll see how it goes. So on a square stone or rectangle stone, my opposites are a little bit more opposite. On an oval stone, that diagonal thing applied, but on rectangles, I can push literal opposites. And this stone doesn't need a whole heck of a lot to push over because it's got such a great curve to it. It's a really beautifully cut stone. So, and it's also 22 gauge, so it's a little easier to get down than the 18 gauge was. So now I'm getting a little bit more lift. Working the way across. Starting to get out to the edges, but not hitting the corners fully. And then I'm going to start working the corners. And so because I've filed these down, the corners just become another compression point where you're pushing the metal towards each other. So I'm cutting in towards the corner rather than, whereas when I'm doing the edges, I'm doing straight on, but the corners, I'm sort of rocking over the curve of the stone a little bit more. And all that happens is they start to close together around the material. Because we've got that filed curve away, it gives the room that it needs to get pushed down.
So you don't ever push directly on the corner towards the corner of the stone then?
No, not even in any of the cornering techniques, you're not pushing, because that's the weakest spot of the stone. Especially like this is a pretty solid stone because it was a thick cabochon. But if you think about it, here's where all of your stress fracture action will happen. If you push on the weakest tip of the stone, blammo, you're going to chip. So yeah, none of it is directly like this on the corner. It's all coming at it from the side of the corner. Good question. Yeah, I would just do that out of, I've been doing it for a while, so I don't even think about it, but that was a great clarification. And corners on snug fit stones are one of my nemesis. You know, you're going to chip stones. It's going to happen at that corner spot. My gosh, 22 gauge set's so much easier than the 18 gauge.
So this can be done with a faceted stone too, right?
Yep, absolutely. It's about making sure that you have just enough that it's going to still come over the corner. And frankly, if you're not using super thin gauge, you can actually get away with setting the stone without those corners being covered. It's just that there's no protection from somebody banging it against, on a ring, somebody bangs the corner of the stone on the table. And the metal acts as a little tiny bit of protection from it chipping. So you want just a smidge over the stone. So I've got this one side, I just put too much of the jet ballistic up there, so it's a little hard to get. But the rest of it is setting quite nicely. Okay, I'm going to bring this back over to the other camera so that you guys can see the close-up and how that's starting. Second to focus. Focus, come on, little guy.
Nice.
So yeah, just that little bit of, there's itty bitty amounts right at each corner. And it's a very subtle curvature. It's kind of an elegant look. Oh, I'm out of camera. It's an elegant look that to me sort of feels kind of old, some are older period or older style of setting. It's evocative of, I'm not going to get the period right, but it's not quite as harsh and cold of a line as a straight edge is going to be. So that one is fairly well set down, but now we need to do some burnishing on it. I didn't switch cameras again. Man, I got to get my stuff together today. So we've got our setting down, and now we want to burnish it. There's all kinds of tools that you can burnish with. I think John talks about the end of a toothbrush that you've cut off and softened with. I didn't bring my burnishers over, so I better bring those. Big burnisher, little one. I am a fan of a curved burnisher, but your mileage may vary. I've also got another one of these cool tools that I got from Chris at Lion Punch, is made out of horn, again with one of those found object handles. And I've never used a horn burnisher, so I'm kind of curious. I don't think I'm going to be able to get in with it the way I need to. Yeah, it's too bulky for this particular task. Here is my regular everyday burnisher. I was just polishing it the other day. Pardon me, guys. I got to go check. I may have left it in the other room when I was cleaning it up. I'll be right back. Okay, I very carefully prepped my burnisher for you guys because it was rusty. Oh, there it is, sitting over where I was polishing. Guess I didn't finish cleaning it up. So I like this particular curve personally. These are vicious, by the way, even though they're soft edged. If you slide on this, you're going to slice yourself pretty badly if you scrape against yourself. I like to do a sideways burnish from the carrot peeler style that I showed last time. It's not going to be possible when it's set in this stuff, so I may have to take it back out. You can also do from the top down, but if you do, you're risking scratching up whatever's beneath it. In this case, we don't have anything beneath it, so it's going to likely do the job. See if I can get in there. So again, this is one of those support, and I'm using I'm not zoomed out far enough for you guys to see that hand motion. Bear with me.
Are you using the side of the burnisher or the inner curved part?
The side, absolutely
Okay.
the side, yeah.
Thank
And
you.
that's why if it gets it any rough, like mine had these, it must have rusted in transit when I was moving a couple of years ago. I really need to buy another one. I just polished it down. I filed it and then repolished it. It's a little sloppier than I want. So when I get a chance, I'll buy a brand new one. But yeah, it's this action of pulling towards me. So all of this is like those hand strengthener machines. That's the action you're taking while supporting what you're headed towards in a scraping motion. And this is another one that if you do it right, you're going to get tiny little flecks of the silver coming off. Not a big deal. Yeah, this really needs a better polish than I have on it. It's adding to the problem, not taking it away. So all I'm doing is scraping down along my edge, the top edge, trying not to be on the stone, just on the metal. See if my smaller polish, the smaller one will get me in there. And what it does is that last bit of flattening down, as well as getting a bit of a shine to it, if you're well polished. This is getting less than ideal shine. Yep, I'm gonna take this stone out.
Can you use a burnisher on the 18 gauge heavy wall? Or
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense because it's too thick?
Absolutely, you can. So you can use a burnisher on anything. It's just how much work you're going to have to put into it to get it where you want it to go. So play around with all these different tools in different orders. Like, I mean, obviously you have to set it first, but try doing a little filing and then burnishing. Try burnishing and seeing if you need to file. Sorry, I'm going to be popping this out just so that I can get better access to it. So yeah, a burnisher, you know, you can use it on like scratches, like I just put into the side of this by peeling it out. So I can do burnish work along the edge of this piece and it'll do its job. It starts to put a little bit of a shine back where the scratch was. And burnishers don't always come in this form. One of the scariest burnishers that I ever had somebody teach me about is taking the end of a dead burr and blunting it and putting a little U in it and using it as a beater. And that burnishes a spot if you've got a big deep gouge or something like that. I just don't like the idea of things spinning off center in my flex shaft.
So you mean you put a groove in the bottom of the cutoff burr?
No, it actually, you bend it, you shape it into a little U so that it's doing an egg beater style hit.
I see.
And it makes me too nervous to use. But it does its job, by God. I just didn't feel I could comfortably control it. So again, fairly, you can see I'm getting sort of white fingernails because I'm pressing so completely and white knuckled. So I'm using a lot of force, but concentrated on the edge that I'm focused on here. So taking it
Rachel,
along the wall, just at the top.
Rachel,
Yep, go ahead.
Andy Cooperman uses like an eye screw
Oh yeah, for the same effect.
for the same thing in his flex shaft. Yeah.
Yep, I believe it. It's the same basic shape that you end up with. I think it was Rachel Wengenroth who taught me the make one out of an old bit. And I think I'd probably be more comfortable with Andy's idea because then it's not, it's the part that freaked me out is that it's clearly flipping off center. But if you started with an eye hook, it would be centered.
Yeah.
I've been using power tools too long to know that like the gut reaction when something is wobbling in the spin is to go, whoa, that's not right. That's not safe. But by God, it sure did take the dings out. So I could easily spend hours on this, just getting it all cleaned up and nice and snug. Because this downward pressure is adding to that, getting rid of any final, I missed pushing all the way down. But it's probably not worth doing much more than that with this edge because it's driving me a little nuts that I'm adding marks to it. I think I'd probably polish these out. Let me pop over to the super duper camera and show you what it gets. It sort of does a similar thing to what the bright cut does on the heavier bezels. Come on, focus for me. I gotta make it think about its focus. Either that or it's too shiny. So I'm getting this tiny little shiny bit all the way around the top by doing that burnish. And it's adding to the strength of the set. So again, I'd do a touch-up polish on these, probably starting with my Swifty wheels, unless I needed to take out a really big gash out of it, which I do in this case because I managed to poke it while I was pulling it out of the plastic. By the way that I pulled it out of the plastic is not the right way. If you're doing it when you have hot water, you put it in the hot water until it loosens up a little bit, and then it'll come out fairly quickly. If you've got anything extra finely detailed, you might get some of the plasticky stuff stuck, and it's a matter of letting it cool enough that you can chip it and pull it out with tweezers and stuff. Questions about that one? Okay. Now let's talk about our other version of this, which I think I'm going to start by pulling out because I'm pretty sure I can't actually reach this one. So our other version is the one that we're going to cut corners into. Yeah, let me see if I can put my water on and get it hot enough to at least let me release this. So we'll do another one while that's boiling. So marquee setting. It's one of the other ones we did. Okay. Again, faceted and or tabbed either way. And this, I did not take the corners down much. I took them down just enough to follow the size of the stone. I don't know if we talked a lot about it, but when you're trying to get a consistent height all the way around your stone, or the appearance of a consistent height, that's what I should say. It's important to know that your stone may not be the same height all the way around, as we discover as we're setting things. But if you discover it prior to setting things, is even better. There's my white. So big problem. Oh, yeah, that's not going to show. A big problem with our stones is if they're lopsided in height. But when we look at it from the top, we want to have an even fit around the stone, right? Whatever the shape of the stone is, we want to have this line of metal to appear even. And we've probably all done one where we get something that looks more like that when we're looking at it from the top. So there's a lot of extra metal in one corner, one edge. So one of the tricks I use for getting my metal cut down before I set to the right height is I rest a fine Sharpie marker on the inside. This one's already been cut, so I'm not sure I'm going to be able to show you guys this, but on the inside of the bezel wall, resting against the stone at a steep angle. So less than 45 degrees, I would say like a 30-degree angle. And I run my pen line staying at that same angle all the way around the inside of the stone. And what that does for me is no matter what the height of the stone is, I'm using that height to push against to make my cut mark or my file mark. And then I'm filing back to that point. So what that means is I have the same ratio of, if I've got my wall coming along here and my stone is doing this right now, I make a mark that follows it at the same distance, which is roughly what a fine tip Sharpie, I actually prefer for this exercise, I prefer this kind of fine tip Sharpie, because that angle is just about perfect when I'm resting the metal of the Sharpie on the stone. So by resting it there and making that mark, it creates a relationship between the curve of the stone and the curve of the mark line I've done, so that when I file this all away at whatever height it needs to be filed at, down to that line, I end up with an even top view when I set the stone. I hope that made some kind of sense when I don't have an example to show you as I do it. I should have kept one aside for that. I apologize. So that's what we've done prior to this setting exercise. So I do that sort of second nature as I'm filing and finishing all the stuff that I did between rounds for you guys. Man, my little hot water pot is boiling quickly. So give me a second. I'm going to see if I can get the rectangle one out. Steamy hot. So I'll bring it over. Not that you're going to really be able to see boiling, but I'm just putting the jet set back in the water to try and loosen it enough that I can get the setting out of the material. That'll let us do the angle cut, which works on any corner as well. So this stone, while we're waiting for that to loosen up, which takes a minute or two, this stone, I just filed down the corners a smidge, not to the level that I did on the square stone we just talked about. So my filing here was really to make sure that it followed the shape of the stone, not so much a design. Could I have cut it down further? Absolutely. As a decorative choice. Again, I tend not to want to uncover the ends of stones because that's the weakest point, most likely to get banged up if it gets hit. All right, I'm not going to poke at this with my fingers until I get it out of the water. Let's see if I can loosen that up. So just a couple minutes in and you'll see that it becomes kind of goopy on the outside, but inside on the jet set, the jet ballistic at least, there's like a rock hard lump inside. It has to sit in the water for a lot longer to be loosened up. And you want to make sure that you don't leave it as a lump. So you're going to put it in the hot water and flatten it once it gets soft enough to do so that it's easier to melt the next time. So we're just going to get it down to this kind of flat. All right, so I have my ready to go, but not yet cornered piece. Did I put my corner? I did not do my corner drilling. So I need to get a ball burr for this. And I'm going to drill the corners out a little bit from the inside. Here's my ball burr choice. So I tend to start with a fairly small little burr and only size up if I need to. So this is a tiny little set of corners. Start somewhere in there. That's going to be too big. All right, let's see. Ball burr. And then before this gets too cool, I'm going to squish it. So I'm just trying to flatten it out enough that the next time I'm ready to melt it down, it's a lot easier to melt. So get it as thin as you can before you're done for the day with it. You can see even that long in there. The water I can boil down here is hot, but not hot enough to really get it to go. So that's what I've got for that piece that I just worked on. All right, so corners, all I'm looking to do is in each corner, right at the point that the corner is going to be resting, which is usually, if you've done your job in building it right where the wall of the step meets the outer wall in the corner. So I'm going into each of those corner top sections. So I can get to my gear. And I'm just doing a very gentle interior burring of the corner.
So you're not trying to take down the height of the bezel at all, correct?
Not at all on this. So this is the alternative method to, like, if we want consistent walls all the way around, we're doing the alternative method to the one we just did. All this is for is to give a corner a little air pocket so that when we do press down on the corners or at the angles that we're going to press down at to get the corners set, we're not, there's room for the corner to push in. So let me draw this one because it's hard to see on the scale we're working. So we have our wall and our corner, right? And then we have our lower level wall. That back in here would be somewhere around there. And what we're doing is putting a little pocket inside. That's a dash because it's not coming through to the other side. Right at that corner where the two parts meet. So it'll tuck in here basically. So that when the stone hits that corner, let's say it's a faceted stone because it's even more important for those. So our stone is sitting here and we've got our facets coming up and the corner is there, right? That's my really badly drawn faceted stone. Okay, so we've got the facets and this corner is what tucks in to that spot. And it's the most at risk of chipping. By simply making this little pocket for it, if we accidentally push more this direction as we're setting so that it goes bumping up into the corner tightly against the metal, it's got room, it's got wiggle room, keeping the air around it so that it's not going to hit the metal and chip, because the force directionally, if there were no pocket there, it would push up against metal and the metal's going to win every time. Diamond, doesn't matter. It's hitting that corner is what's going to take it out. So we're getting rid of that opportunity. We're giving it a little space. Make sense?
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so let me check that I actually got those
Yes.
cornered in. Yep, another question? Or is that just a confirmation of it makes sense?
Yes.
All right. So not much of a burring because you don't want to push through to the other side. I'm just making sure that there's a little bit of wiggle room. If you see it starting to bubble out on the side, you've gone too far. Stop there. All right, so I've got a nominal corner balled out in each of these corners. And then because we're doing the other version of the square setup, John says, I believe that he wants us using a number 8 saw blade for this, if I'm remembering correctly. A 6 or a 6.0 or an 8.0, so itty bitty little saw blade. And the way that this version works is we're taking, instead of the cutting it all away the way that we did on the first one, what we're doing is slicing it a little bit, pushing, slicing a little bit and pushing, so that eventually we're going to be taking only that material away that's keeping it from getting closed firmly over the piece, which is why we work with such a small blade. I gotta find out if I have 6s and 8s. Okay, what do I have? Well, I've got 7s. I'm going to split the difference. So I'm using a 7/0, which is next to nothing in the saw blade family. Oops, that's 2. In fact, it's so next to nothing. Goodness, these are itty bitty. Come apart. Okay, then you can't see which direction they go, so you have to feel. These are the size saw blades that if you even think about pushing down too much, they're going to give you grief. So what we're doing here is a first pass cut into the corner. It's going to need to be a little bit of an angle. Sorry, I can't get this a better position for you guys to watch. So all I'm doing is starting my corner and sawing down just to where the seat of the inside is, one pass. Oh, that was not a straight line. Yikes. Well, let's see if we can correct from that, but I don't know.
So did you use the burr on all four corners already?
Yep.
Okay, so that was on the inside and now you're using the blade on the outside.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
There goes one. So I'm just cutting a single line down to the inside wall and no further. Except now I have to switch blades because those are so delicate that my coarse approach to filing, to sanding, excuse me, to sawing goes through them too quickly. Tells me to slow down. So all this is doing is taking material out of the way for when we push it together. And we're going to keep repeating the push, the cut, the push, the cut when we start to set. And it's just that tiny amount of material getting out of the way that makes it possible to fold it over. Again, other folks would tell you, you don't saw, you just start at your corner and push down. But John prefers to make the material get out of the way. Wow, I'm not sawing straight today. Okay, so each corner has been sawn down just to the inside line. Put my stone in place. Find the right direction to put my stone in place. There we go. All right, and then we're doing the same exercise that we were doing on the other one to start, which is we're pushing over north, south, east, west. And we are not starting with the corners per John's order of operations. So I'm just using my good old everyday bezel pusher for this one. It's still 22 gauge. So push to one side, push to the other, opposite that. North, south, east, west. And what you'll start to see is that because I've made those little slits, my corners already are starting to sort of move themselves out a little bit. So they were like this. They're now, because I'm pushing in around them, they're starting to pinch outward a little bit. But I'm going to keep working, not yet hitting all the way onto the corners, but working the side walls more.
Rachel, could you just move your head a second and give me an idea of what you're doing? Just
I'm
show me.
doing, this is the in up that I was doing before, in and a little bit of up, not a lot. And again, trying to not chicken wing it. So it's the opposite sides work. Do a little bit on one side, do a little bit opposite it, do a little bit at the end. But again, I'm working my way out to those corners, but I'm not at them yet. And then I'll bring it over to the good camera to show you where we are so far. So, whoops, out of focus, out of camera, where are we? There we go. No, my goodness, there we go. So we've pushed in all along everywhere except at the actual corners. The corners are starting to sort of squeeze outward because we've made the cut. So they're moving out of each other's way. That's, you're seeing the compression that happens.
What corners have you sawn?
All of them.
All of them. Okay.
Yep. And so it's, let's see if this one is showing it really well.
Now you're determining whether you need to saw some more by pushing them in.
So I have to do the first step of pushing them down a little bit, and then I will saw because it's guaranteed there's too much material in the way. So I've done my everything but the corners layer. Now I'm going to do the actual corners, but I'm not again pushing at straight at the corner. I'm pushing at one side in a little bit, and it'll start to do this. It'll start to overlap, okay? And then I'm pushing the other corner, and it's pinching in a little bit. I'm pushing a little bit. I'm pushing a little bit from each side. And I'm going to get them pinched over until they're sort of stuck on each other. And at some point, one side is going to refuse to move any further because the other one is in its way.
So this is something you can actually see then, is the overlap of one side of the bezel onto the other.
Yes, it's going to start to do that little overlap, but that's what we're going to be sawing away momentarily when you take the saw back to it.
Oh,
Yep.
I see.
We're going to saw down that center line where they are meeting, and it'll then make a little more room and a little more room and a little more room till it folds over. So it looks kind of pinchy at the corners at this stage as they start to fight for which one gets to go in to what space. I'm going to show that one over on the good camera as well. When I first learned this, I learned to file the corners away, which is another acceptable way. But we're trying the John, oops, I'm going to switch cameras. We're trying the John approach and using the saw. Oh my goodness, I can't get these angles correct. There we go. Focus. So I'm already starting to see it snug up at the corners. This one is the least snug of them. This one's pretty snug. But you can see they're starting to get kind of pokey and pointy off the corner. And so that's why we're now going to go back and saw again. Reminding you that this is the same approach we'll use if we're just doing the point of a teardrop, of a pear-shaped setting, or on the corners if you need to of an emerald cut. So I'm now very carefully trying to catch the same spot that I caught before and sawing down at an angle that won't scrape up the stone. So it's slow and gentle, and I find that just doing a single downstroke and lifting is much more controlled for me. Don't cut into your stone, just taking the metal away. Think of it as you're using it as a file in this case. A very, very skinny little file. Okay, and then once I've got them filed again, that gives me a little more room to push.
So Rachel, how much do you saw down the second time?
I'm just going until I sort of feel that I'm about to hit the stone, because I don't want to actually scrape the stone with the blade if I can help. So it is still going to the same rough spot that I was at before. But
You're sawing off some of the material,
yep,
right?
I'm sawing not off some of the material. I'm sawing literally down the same seam line that I sawed before to just move some of the material out of the way. I'll draw a macro of this and hopefully it'll make a little more sense. My high-tech eraser today.
Well, I like the illustration on the top of page 73.
Yes, 73 shows it quite nicely.
Yeah.
So, and so let me see if I can draw the straight on view of what we're getting. So we started life with this material that was all the way cornered, right? And then we made a saw cut down here so that what we've created is a saw-sized gap in the material. This is our little saw-sized gap. It's down to just where the wall meets. You may, depending on the shape of the stone, you may not even need to go that deeply down. And then we pushed these together. And so they started going out of square and started doing this around the stone a little bit more until they ran into each other again, a little bit angled in. So this is starting to get a little bit of an angle into the corner from each direction. And so we're now snug up against each other, even though there's still a slit there. Right now, our slit is just this tiny little thing. We take the saw, we open up the gap a little bit more. That gives us a little more room to start pushing things together and pushing things together and pushing things together. So that makes a little more sense, I hope.
So when the stone is finally set,
Yep.
does it look like you slice down the corners, or does it look seamless?
No, if you do it well, it looks seamless. That means clean cuts, cleaner than I did on 2 of my corners. And it means that you've done a good job of burnishing, because this is where your burnisher does the finishing touches. And I'll show you just how much you start to, how much it starts to disappear the corner in just a moment, because we're already starting to see that on this stone. Except on the ones that I cut at the bad angle. So I happened to cut a little further than I should have down on this one. I didn't need quite such a complete angle. On a faceted stone, it probably needs a little more than on a cab. This cab has just such a good curve that it didn't need quite that deep. Not sure I need to do more cuts. Maybe on one side. Okay, so I've got one corner that needs another pass, maybe 2 corners that need a third pass. Oops. And I'm judging based on how it goes up against the stone. So this pass, I don't need to go quite as far down my cut as I did before. I just need to make a little bit more room to push these together.
Is it easier or more difficult if you did the bezel in gold?
I don't know that I've ever done a square cut bezel in gold, because I tend to use my gold in either abstract shapes or rounds. Do I think it would be easier or harder? So I find the making of the bezel harder in gold because I grew up on silver. People who grew up on gold say silver is hard, and I don't understand that.
Okay.
I don't think the cutting is going to be any different. Maybe it depends on what carat gold you're working. So maybe you work in more gold than I do to give opinions. It's certainly harder to set, like the metal physically is harder in gold. So I use my, it's got much more spring to it. I use my hammer handpiece when I'm doing 18 karat settings.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anybody else work in gold enough to have an opinion on that one? Okay.
I've just been seeing the combination of both, like people using gold for the bezel and then silver for the rest.
Yep, I tend to try to use gold for the bezel and silver for the backing if it's not going to show or if it's going against something silver, because it saves money, a lot of money. So I'm now so close to the corner that I'm only sawing literally the angle that's still pointing upward, not all the way down to the center seam. Now I'm seeing if I can, in any way, do a little bit of a correction on the one that I sawed at a bad angle, because it's giving a little bit of knob. If this cut doesn't work, then I can do it with a file to touch up the little blob of extra metal I've got on one side. Let me show you on the close-up. So we're already closing up those corners quite nicely. And it's a fairly consistent band around. Let me bring the other one for comparison for the visual look. So here's our curved corner one, and here's our square corner one. And it's a subtle difference, but it really is. This one follows the line of the cab with the curves, and this one sort of makes it more consistently squared up. Now I'm gonna push a little bit more on the one we're working on right now, just because it looks like it's got a couple corners that could use some touching up. And I'm going to burnish. But before I burnish on this one, I'm probably going to touch it up with a file, just because I want those slits to really, really disappear. And the last of that is filing it so they can't be seen. But yeah, there's even on my ugliest cut, which was this corner, the seam is disappearing into the piece. On the better cut, I say, looking for the better cuts, this one can't see the seam at all. So it's all about the metal being compressed to the point that it overlaps into the next piece over.
If you were doing a heavy bezel, would it be the same?
It would be the same steps. It would be a lot harder to get your compression down.
You'd have to use a hammerhand piece, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, for me, this is, I go to my hammerhand piece because I have better things to do with my hand strength, what little is left of it at this point in my life, than to waste it on hours of hand setting heavy bezels. But if you don't have a hammer, hammerhand pieces are not cheap, especially the micromotor kind. So if you don't have a hammerhand piece, you can still hand set it by the tapping method that we were using. So I'm just doing a tiny bit of cleanup of the corners themselves. And then I may do a little more pushing down because this is showing me some spots that I need to tighten. Certainly not my neatest corners ever. And do any of this sawing and filing in very small, checking frequently passes, because it can go from I'm looking good to I've oversawed or overfiled quite quickly. But by the time you've done your basic sawing and push down, you've got the basis for an even looking setting all the way around. So that's a little bit cleaner. Let's see if I can get it even further. More pushing. So again, I'm not pushing directly into the corner. I'm pushing from either side of the corner. And then both of these go through that whole, how are we going to clean up? Are we going to neaten and file? Are we going to use a Swifty wheel to clean it up? But those stones are the same size stone. I got them as a pair. And you can see that it changes the size look of this because it's more framed. So the squared up one is a little more framed. This opens up the stone. It's a tiny little difference in how we set those two, but boy, it changes the effect both up close and from further away. I hope you guys get a little sense of that. So that's the cutting into corners method. Again, a lot of folks are going to teach you almost the antithesis of that, which is don't cut away the corners, push them down and make the material bobble out into the body of the piece. So what you're doing when you do that approach, and I'm not judging one over the other, I can just tell you that somewhere early in my career, either John or someone else, I think it was someone earlier than that, taught me the other way. So when you're doing the corners first method, you're pushing in and pushing in, and by getting these corners to come in, it pushes the extra metal. I'm exaggerating it here, but say you pushed it in, it's sort of bobbling it out into the material to either side of it. So we get a good corner, tight and snug, but then we have to find a way to push down all that extra material that's bobbled around the edges. And I personally find that harder to get rid of in a long stretch, especially if it's a heavier bezel. But your mileage may vary. Make yourself a set of square or rectangular settings and try the different versions. Try the cutaway or the filed away, try the cutaway, try the corner first, and see which ones let you manipulate the metal the best, because they're all going to get you somewhere in the setting process. What are we at for time? 6:42. All right. I think what I would like to do is do one of our unusual settings. And we have a couple choices. If anybody has strong preferences, we've got the abstract shape, the crystal form, and we've got one of the conicals. We want to do that. Actually, we have two of our conicals set up in two different materials. Maybe we do one of the conicals so we can see what it's like when it's in the shellac.
Yeah.
Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Conical setting it is. I can find my Chuck key. There we go.
Now you're going to have these as samples, right? Because once you set the stone, it's not like you can solder them or anything.
No, I'm not. So this is all, I'm making the sampler board so that when
Okay.
I'm teaching classes and so on, I can show all the various examples. So yes, they're all staying part of the sample set, unless I find that there's something that's absolutely perfect for a project and I absolutely have to unset it so that I can build it into something. Or if somebody gives me a laser welder, one of those things. If I had a laser welder, I'd be all set. Let me grab the right stone for this. A lovely little quartz conical, I think is what we put in this. Scalloped bezel. Oh, no, this is not. It is jasper, I think.
Are you taking photos of them, like before you set them?
Oh, that would have been smart. No, I wasn't.
Okay, maybe.
But I've got
kind of hard
video.
to visualize it. It would be hard as a student to visualize it,
That's
like
true.
that.
Well, I may have to make extra examples because I'm not just making one of each of these.
You can do screenshots from the video.
Yes, that's true. I can do screenshots, and I will go, and that's a wise thing to advise. I'll take photos of the in progress ones as well. Okay, so conical setting. Remember that on this setting, what we did was we chose to either castellate it or make it scallopy, because just like in that cornering exercise, there's too much metal to push down. So the act of putting in those slits gives us room for the squish down. We'll see if it gives us enough room for the squish down when we start pushing. This is a perfect example of one that is really critical that we do opposite sides, but it should be as easy as, okay, that's actually, you guys can see that happening. So I don't know if you saw, but by pushing on that one, the stone shifted to the side. That is exactly what I've been describing when you don't do your opposite side. So I need to support it from both sides. So watch closely. I'll see if it'll happen left, right as well. Not as much, but it shifted away, which is why you do a north, south, east, west to center it. And then this one happens to have nothing but our compass points. Okay, what I like about the shellac is it is seriously holding. I don't have, like on the others, I felt a little bit of wiggle after putting a lot of pressure. But this is really, really held down, I say, as it pops off. Oh, well, I was feeling so good about that. So let's get rid of that. That's what I get for saying it's holding well.
Just as long as you don't hurt yourself.
Scraped my knuckle, no biggie. So this is straight up an exercise in pushing it down to the wall or to the stone, and making sure that you have enough material cut out of the way that you're getting a snug fit. Now, if we had put a jump ring, oh, sorry, I did cut myself. Let me go grab a Band-Aid so I'm not bleeding on camera. Yeah, let me grab the Band-Aid and stop talking from far away. So the if we had put a jump ring or something on this in order to connect it to whatever we're hanging it from, this would be a much harder setting exercise because we would be we'd be pushing that around. I mean, you know, I have often managed to snap off a bail or a jump ring or something without realizing it because I was pushing the wrong direction as I set. This happens to be a little easier because we don't have that, but it's also barely enough material out of the way to get pushed down. So if I wanted to be a little cautious, I might take my saw and try to move a little bit more metal out of the way, like pick one of these saw lines that I've done and very, very cautiously try to get in there. It's going to be a tough one at the angle of a conical, but I might be able to get a little more material out. I just don't want to cut the stone. So I'm picking ones that I think have a little leeway to take more material out. And again, I'm using that same skinny little blade. And the thing that I don't suspect we have an option for on this one is really burnishing what we've got. I think that's going to be an unlikely angle that we won't get much out of burnishing it. Oops. Yep, for not having it on shellac. That is, because it's serrated, not a terribly hard setting to set. And we've got a cute little something to add to details. I think looking at this now that it's set, I think that I would probably next time make it a little bit shorter of a bezel than I did. This takes up more of the cool stone than I want it to, and it doesn't need to. So I'd back it out maybe a third of the, I'd make it 2/3 of the height it currently is on my next one. And I think I have a castellated one that I can trim back further.
Can you
So,
can you take a picture of that so we can look at it later because it's so hard to see?
Yep, absolutely. And let me bring it over to the other camera too, just to help. God, these aren't changing on me when I hit the right buttons. Let's see. So,
Would you cut the castellations down more too?
yeah, I would actually work so what I would have done is made the bezel overall shorter. I would have like cut away another millimeter or so and then remade my castellations. Oops, I'm not showing on screen. Remade the castellations just because that seems like an awful lot of cap for
Mhm.
this tiny little stone. It's sort of overwhelming the stone.
Yeah, it looks like it's more than half the stone, but it isn't,
It
right?
isn't. Yeah, it's really only a third of the stone. But I think I'd want to go down to like a quarter. Just I need to make sure that it would hold. So I'm going to play around. I have another one that is a similar cut stone that I'll play around with a little bit more and see what I can do. I will try to take close-up photos of all of these for you guys. As they get up, I'll do my little polish up and stuff to make them look nice, but as they get going, I'll try to get shots up and post them to the Facebook group. And then let's see what else have we got that's a quickie. Let's do a little combo setting, prong and bezel. So this was the combo, the mixed setting where we did a basic step bezel.
Switch
but
your camera.
shorter. Oh, thank you. I'm not on camera. A basic, this was we added prongs to a standard step bezel that we made a little shorter. The wrong way. So the inner wall, outer wall height ratio, the outer wall doesn't come up as high as it does on a bezel that's only for the sake of the step bezel. And I should have put a lot less of the plastic stuff in there. Let me get the right stone for that, which is the stone. Quartz. This is the quartz. Smoky quartz. Smoky quartz that hopefully didn't break. Oh, my plastic is too high. Okay, so I'm going to have to redo that one at another time. And see if there's any others that are. Well, let's do this one. Okay, so this is our abstract crystal form. And let's think about this. It has corners. They're just really sharp corners at times. It also has wall pieces that are different heights and, some of them tuck in and out. Excuse me. Oh no, allergies. So we have to think about which parts get pushed in more or less. And on these, John doesn't talk a whole lot about the actual setting of these. My tendency is to go find the spots that have the most room to push in and work those first. So I'm finding corner spots, I'm finding overhangs, that sort of thing, and working them in first, because there isn't really a north-south kind of situation on this. And I think this is going to be more awkward in the plastic than out. So I'm just pushing still at that side on push until I get to a better position. I'm pushing as much as I can in and a little bit up on each push, looking for the big spots. I'm doing my sharp corners later because I want to work material over to them, and just pushing until I find the gaps. And the thing about the odd shape is I try to push down low if possible first and then work up so that I'm getting the lower portion undercut pushed in before I start to move the upper portion of it. And this is, I think, a 22 gauge we were working with. So it's a lot of metal to move on this scale. And you have to, when you're working with crystals, you have to be careful because too much push and you're going to chip a crystal off. But that's why I designed this to try and hit mostly the supporting rock and not the crystal itself. When we did that page, you know, we did a drawing of the outline from the tape on this one, just to get our measurements approximate. And so I'm not totally avoiding the corners, I'm just working my way out to them. Because as the rest pinches in, it's going to start getting closer and closer, and it'll be easier to push those corners in. And then I have a cheat method that John would never approve of when I get to these super sharp corners. And that is that I go in with a pair of flat nosed pliers and I pinch, knowing that I'm going to have a lot of marks and a lot of filing that I'm going to need to do. But I get a nice closure on it. And it follows the angle of the stone. He probably wouldn't have fits. He's sort of a guy who says if it works, it works. So, but he also told us that the way to not have to clean up all the marks is to not make the marks in the first place. So I'm just tightening it down. There's no way that stone is going anywhere at this point. And now I'm going to work on pushing in closer on the couple of spots that are sticking out. And then I'll work on taking away material from the corners.
Sorry, Rachel, when you said you used the flat nose pliers,
Yep.
does that mean you squish the corner?
I did. Isn't that sacrilegious of me?
Or do you sort of squish it into the stone?
Not into the stone. I'm pinching. That's very important. Yeah, good question. Yeah, and
okay.
I'm not trying to grab the stone. I'm trying to pinch the excess material
I
together.
see that.
Yeah, so it's getting that little crimp basically. And it, yeah, great point. Yeah, I'm not trying to push it. I'm not trying to use these as bezel pushers. I'm trying to get the metal close together because then I'm going to move into either that filing and folding method or the sawing and folding method that we just did on those rectangular ones, depending on how much material. Like this one, I might chop off a chunk. This one, I might just file a little notch and then push and file and push, or saw and notch. But before I get to that, I have a little more basic pushing to do, where it's still up over the edge. Yeah, there are, you know, you could possibly even make a pair of these that you put a thin coating of the plast on, any of the plastics, so that it doesn't mar as much as just pinching. I learned long ago that I'm not a high polish, low mark kind of jeweler because I don't have the patience for it, but it's certainly worth taking the time if you want to get a nice clean look and don't use the cheat I just gave you. So listen for if you're hearing crunchy sounds. On a couple of these, I'm getting close enough to some crystals that I don't want to push too hard, but I've got fairly good coverage everywhere but at the corners themselves. So now, let's see if this shows well enough on screen. So you guys can probably see there's this gap at that corner. I'm going to treat that just like I did the square corner and try to take a little saw notch out. It's a little hard on the corners of the crystals. You got to be careful that you're at the right angle. Do it without cutting myself at this angle. So I've just put a notch in but not all the way down. And that gives me, again, a little room to push my metal and push my metal. And then I'm going to go take a little more away. Careful you're not marking up the stone. And I'm now getting a much snugger corner than I was. Okay. This big corner here, I might take a chunk of metal off completely, just being careful not to cut down too far, and then fold over, because it was such a cutback on the stone that I couldn't get enough material, you know, without the stone not being able to fit into the setting. So I'm going to coarsely cut off a first pass. Yep, except I'm going to break the blade. Put that out for a slightly heavier blade. And each stone like this is going to be a little bit different as to what techniques work with it or don't. You know, it depends on if you have a nice upright walled stone, you may have less cut back and cornering that you have to do. Or you may not, you know, this particular stone has enough nooks and crannies that you don't necessarily need to have bezel all the way around, as long as there's enough material at the right spots to hold it in place. Ugh, okay, I guess it's not my day for cutting off the saw. So I've literally just taken a chunk away, and then I'm going to file further down to get a lot of the excess material out. It's really hard to get a good angle on while still showing you guys. I'm sorry. So I need to get the material down low enough that there's room for them to fold over each other a little bit. So that one of them kind of wins the push race here. There we go. So the front edge was able to push down a little bit. And then I can fold the other one on top of it. Do a little more sanding and filing. And this extreme of a cut, it's going to be hard to get it nice and snug so that you can't really see the seam, but it should be possible between the filing and the pushing and the burnishing to make it fairly close to disappearing. Let's see if I can get a start on that. I would not be rushing this one quite so much if it weren't, if it were in a piece and it were not end of session.
So if you were using the micro motor hammer,
Yep.
you just hammer it all and not go through this whole process?
So it's a great question. On crystals, I'd probably be less likely to use the micromotor because the vibrations of it are more likely to rattle the crystals around, chip the crystals. But let me think, what else would I consider in that? If it weren't a crystal form, but it was still abstract, I think it would really depend on the kind of stone that I was setting, because most of the abstracts have some kind of potentially fracturable shape in them. And I'd want to be cautious of that. So show me a stone and I'll tell you how I'd handle it, I guess is what I'm saying on that one. Switch to round or a crossing file.
Yeah, that was really irregular for that one.
Yes, this one's super irregular. Yeah, one of the other irregular shapes that I teach in the stone setting, you know, in the bezels less ordinary class is how to set a slice of a geode. I teach a tab setting for that. Oops, wrong one. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to rush past this, but you can see that I'm starting to get it folded over enough that the crack is starting to blend in. And so a lot more work on that will get it a closer fit. Stone's certainly not going anywhere. It's got a little bit of wobble, which it will until I get this last corner tucked down. But sometimes it's just about the brute force. And this is one of those. Brute force, while delicate, because it's crystalline and you don't want to crack it. All right, that was a zip through of a bunch of settings, and we have all of the super crazy ones yet to come. So all of the weird back settings and the double setting, and I'll properly position that prong setting for next time. So it's going to be a little bit longer before we get these done. Are there any settings that we've done that you guys specifically want to make sure I don't skip them? I picked, like I said, I picked a few that I thought were sort of representative, but anything, oops, I'm sitting here like I'm showing you my face and I'm not. Hang on. Anybody have specific ones that they want to watch? Okay, I'll take that as a whatever I pick is what we'll do.
Well, I can't wait for those back setting ones.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how those manage, because I haven't done those kinds of back settings before. The only thing I have ever used regularly is a reversed faceted stone in a standard step bezel. And we've got a couple way different than that styles. So I'm looking forward to the capped, this one, where we've got the cap that goes on top and gets set in. Trying to think what the best material is to hold that in when setting. And our double bezel, which I have one end set up, and we'll do one, and then we have to bury the other stone in something to make it an option. That's the one that had the 2 bullets. Yeah, we've got a few ahead of us. And the dreaded cutting away of the little band on the briolette. Anybody have any questions from this session or any stuff to show off? And also a reminder, no session next time. Next one will be the first Wednesday in July. And I failed to put up all of the notices. I don't know if anybody's new here and didn't get the posts about Rio for schools. I hope some of you have gone and set up your Rio for schools, but I will put that in the chat in case you didn't. And there's the Rio. Come on, paste. Not. Okay, chat's not playing well today. Where's my chat? Anybody else have stuff that they want to show while I'm futzing with computery stuff?
Is it pretty easy to take something I've got on my iPhone and sending it to my laptop, but how would I post it here as a picture?
Here as a picture, you wouldn't, but you could put it up on the Facebook group.
Okay, I'll put it in the Facebook group.
Yep. Yeah. Anybody have things they want to show live? No? Okay. Let me give one more try to get my chat showing. It is just not letting me paste stuff. Maybe it's too big. Yep, chat is misbehaving. I'll let you know it's not in the Facebook group because I don't think I can post that one publicly. Oh my goodness. Let me try closing chat altogether. And anyway, I will let you go because this is just not behaving, but I will see you in a month, I think. Do I have anything else to remind you of? There's still 2 classes you can register for. There's my Metalworks clasps class, and there's the November Bezels Less Ordinary, where we start to play around with variations. I'll remind you that it's a good idea to buy John's book and support the actual artist whose material we're working from. That would be great.
So
And yep,
posting the dates we won't be meeting in Facebook.
I will be posting it in Facebook. I just didn't want to surprise people and make them think it was tonight that was canceled. So I'm going to do that, and I'll send out an email to people letting them know.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Okay,
very much,
thank you
Kay.
so much.
Happy
Thank
setting.
you. And have a safe trip.
Thank you.
And hope your mother feels better.
Yes.
Thanks.
Good luck with your mother.
Talk to y'all later. And
Thank you,
and
Rachel.
make stuff. You have a whole month to show me things. So make stuff.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Try safe.